Hi guys, so Dominic Cummings was invoked in the House of Commons on Wednesday during a clash between Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, and Boris Johnson, Prime Minister. Now, before we get to Keir Starmer's invoking of Dominic Cummings, I think Starmer was really on fire on Wednesday. He was really quick on the spot. He was able to put Boris Johnson in a very uncomfortable position. I'd like to see more of this. Unfortunately, his first question, I would have had it at the end as a killer blow in a sense, because it is really a good question that will remain in the minds of the public. I know that most people don't watch Prime Minister's questions. They just, tune in for these sound bites or these small clips that go viral generally. But this was a good exchange, and Boris Johnson was a bit on the run here, a bit muddled. Let's get into it.
To the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Who does the Prime Minister think deserves a pay rise more? An NHS nurse or Dominic Cummings?
I would have actually added, and unfortunately he didn't talk about this during this PMQs, was also these consultants that we've heard about, £6,000 a day. But I think Dominic Cummings is someone who's fresh in the minds of the public.
Mr. Speaker, as I told the Honourable Lady from the Liberal Democrats earlier on, we owe a massive debt as a society, and I personally, to the nurses of our NHS. And that's why we've asked the Public Sector Pay Review Body exceptionally to look at their pay. I want to stress, however, as the House knows, that starting salaries for nurses have gone up by 12.8% over the last 3 years, and it is thanks to the package that this government has put in place that we now have 10,600 more nurses in our NHS, Mr. Speaker, than there were 1 year ago, and 60,000 more in training.
Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he says nurses' pay has gone up. I know he's desperate to distance himself from the Conservatives' record over the last decade. As he well knows, since 2010, nurses' pay has fallen in real terms by more than £800. And he didn't answer my question. It was a very simple question. He's been talking about affordability. He could afford to give Dominic Cummings a 40% pay rise. He could afford that. Now he's asking NHS nurses to take a real-term pay cut. How on earth does he justify that?
More of this. I love this. This is really what Keir Starmer should be doing at every PMQs. He's analytical, but I think you need to be a bit more theatrical. And this is what the public need to hear. They need to hear how Dominic Cummings is being looked after, while the NHS, who have been looking after the public, have been forgotten. And of course, Boris Johnson is going to respond with numbers, which mean really nothing. And I think talking about billions and hundreds of millions of pounds doesn't really land. I think we need to hear more about individual members of the NHS and how they are struggling. I think this could be a good way, a tactic in a sense, that the opposition could use. Pick an example of someone who's working in the NHS, hold them up and get Boris Johnson to respond to that. Because it's easier for him to respond to a politician. It's very difficult for him to respond to a member of staff in the NHS or a member of the public.
Mr. Speaker, as I repeat the point that I have made, I believe that we all owe a massive debt to our nurses, indeed all our healthcare workers and our social care workers. And one of the things that they tell me when I go to hospitals, Mr. Speaker, as I know the right honourable gentleman does, is that in addition to pay, one of their top concerns is to have more colleagues on the wards to help them with the undoubted stress and strains of the pandemic. And that's why we provided...
But if you're not going to pay them extra, if you're not going to pay them wages that will encourage them to come in, then it's pointless talking about how they want more staff.
Another £5,000 in bursaries for nurses, another £3,000 to help them with particular costs of training and with childcare, Mr. Speaker. And it's because of that package that this year, I believe, we're seeing another 34% increase in applications for nurses. And we are on target. This government of this party of the NHS is on target to deliver 50,000 more nurses in our NHS, Mr. Speaker.
People are joining out of civil duty. They're not joining because of the pay. They're not joining because of the conditions. They're joining despite the pay, despite the conditions. Boris Johnson's package is not inviting people to become doctors and nurses. Doctors and nurses are signing up. People are signing up to be doctors and nurses because of the pandemic, because of what they have seen. It's like a war is going on, and people are signing up to fight this battle. Not because of the pay, and not because of what Boris Johnson says.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about recruitment. There are currently 40,000 nursing vacancies, 40,000 and 7,000 doctors' vacancies. How on earth does he think a pay cut is going to help solve that? And
very good. I'm glad he said pay cut and not what the government are trying. The narrative the government have is it's a pay rise. And they're trying to convince the public that the pay rise, is for the nursing and the doctors and the NHS staff, while everyone else is on a pay freeze. In reality, the pay freeze is a pay cut, and the NHS staff's pay increase or pay rise is another cut. So nobody is actually gaining. Some people are worse off, and some are even worse than that. No one's better off here. The government are trying to spin it as the NHS are doing very well. This is a great bonus for them. And, they should be content with that. They should be satisfied.
frankly, I'd take the Prime Minister a bit more seriously if he hadn't spent £2.6 million of taxpayers' money on a Downing Street TV studio, or £200,000 on new wallpaper for his flat. Mr. Speaker, they say charity starts at home, but I think the Prime Minister's taking a bit too literally.
Very well said. These are things that are in the media. I think this is a very good approach. Take things... Look, I'm not a fan of this type of theatrical approach, but it's the only way to deal with Boris Johnson. Make him look like a fool. Make him look like an idiot. You can't do it using data or using an intelligent approach. You have to use these theatrics. Talk about his flat. Talk about Dominic Cummings. Talk about things that are fresh in the minds of the public. We all know about Boris Johnson and his girlfriend redecorating the flat and spending a huge amount of money on that. You have to put it in the people's minds. Is it better to spend money on Boris Johnson's flat, or is it better to spend money on NHS staff who are fighting to save people's lives?
Let me try something very simple. Does the Prime Minister accept that NHS staff will be hundreds of pounds worse off a year because of last week's budget?
No, Mr. Speaker, because, and of course we will look at what the independent peer review body has to say, exceptionally about the nursing profession, whom we particularly value. But what he should also know, and which he should reflect to the House, is that under this government, we not only began by a record increase in NHS funding of, I think, 33...
And then Boris Johnson resorts to the typical, we're spending money here and we're spending money there. At the end of the day, saying we're spending £100 million or even £100 billion means nothing to the staff who are on the front line. It means nothing to them because it's not going into their pockets. If you were working in a company and you asked for a pay rise and they said, well, don't talk about pay rise, look at how much money we're spending in the company. It means nothing to you if you know that, well, at the end of the month, my situation hasn't improved. The company's situation may have improved, but my situation hasn't. And it's frankly disgusting to have Boris Johnson talking about how, yes, we're pumping so much money into the NHS, when the real issue, of course, is the pay that the staff are receiving. And this bonus that they're supposed to be getting, which in reality is a pay cut. So unfortunately, the rest of the Prime Minister's questions sort of went a bit downhill. Once again, I think it would have been good to have that question about Dominic Cummings, who's, the pay of Dominic Cummings and the NHS staff at the end. It would have been a real right hook into Boris's face. But But it was better than nothing, better than previous PMQs. That's why I wanted to talk about it today. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you thought. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?